study in 2 Samuel. So we're tonight in 2 Samuel chapter 22. So let me know when you're ready. If you're joining in with us at home on Facebook, we're in our study of 2 Samuel. We're just about to make it through 2 Samuel, and then we'll decide which way we're going to go from there. But as we get close to the end of this here, we're seeing David's doing a lot of reflection. And I think we all, when we're young, we don't reflect as much. But I think we all, as we get older, we reflect back at our life. And I think as we reflect back at our life and look over our life, that we can see the goodness of God. There's a song that that Aaron loved to sing a lot, and we hear a lot of people that come sing. That's one of the songs they sing all the time by C.C. Winans about the goodness of God. And I think we all can look back in our lives, and we can see times in our life when we know that even though we might not have been doing everything for God that we should, God had his hands upon our life, and he looked after us. And David, this is where he's at, and so in chapter 22, which we'll go through tonight, he's going to be talking to the Lord and really giving him a song. And this chapter 22, if you will, I want you to flip over with me real quick into Psalms. Not Psalms, but Psalm 18. And if you look at Psalms 18, it's the same thing as 2 Samuel chapter 22. And many people, if you like to Google it, we won't do it tonight, but as we know, the psalm can be sung. And so if you go on YouTube when you get home and you want to put in Psalm 18 song, you can hear the psalm sung to the words here and stuff. So I just wanted you to know a little bit of a trivia because as Psalm 18 is almost very similar to Psalms 2 Samuel chapter 22. And it says here in verse 1, "And David spake unto the Lord the words of this song, in the day that the Lord had delivered him out of the hand of all of his enemies and out of the hand of Saul." If you could just even imagine the battles that David was in and how they fought those battles at that period of time. It's absolutely amazing. It had to be God's hand upon him that he could survive. Starting with Goliath. If you look at the little scrawny boy that took the little rock to go fight the big giant, we know in theory if you were a man that was waging a bet, you would have chose the giant every time. But yet, because David had his hand, God had his hand on David, David was able to survive. We see that Saul did all he could to try to kill David. But yet, because of God, God looked out for David. We saw that David was a great warrior. What did it say? You remember what it said that made Saul so mad? Saul has killed his thousands, but David has killed his tens of thousands. And we know that as they go out to battle, it was hand-to-hand combat. We saw here recently how they said that David, you can't go out anymore because he was old. He still had the will and spirit, but his body, he couldn't fight. And then we saw that the giant almost killed him, but one of his generals saved his life. And it said, David, there's nobody can shine the light that you shine. So you can't go back out and fight with us anymore, David. We need you here to be king. So now all this has happened, and David is reflecting upon his life. So this is our older crowd here tonight. I ask you, do you ever lay in bed and reflect about what God has done for you? You ever lay in bed and just think, boy, God's really blessed me? When I see what some other families go through, and I can't understand why, it doesn't mean they did anything bad, but I thank the Lord that I didn't have to go through that. Now, there's two things that I've had to go through that wasn't my choosing. To watch somebody die, like my daddy died with pancreatic cancer, that was a tough thing. That was not anything I wish on anybody else to have to stand there and watch what cancer can do to a body. And while I've helped so many people with dementia and talked to their loved ones and help them if they try to make decisions and figure it out, I would have never chose that for me and my mother to have to go through it. I witnessed Miss Linda, and all she went through with Fred, and me and her talked a lot. And little did I know that Mother would continue to get worse, and we would be battling some of the same things that she did. And she's so sweet. She told me she knew. And it takes somebody going through to really look at you and say, I know what you're going through. I'm praying for you. That means a lot, Miss Linda. And it's tough, but even though all that's happening, I praise every day that when I go over to Mother in the morning, and the first thing I do, and I look at her, and I said, Mom, you know who I am today? She said, yeah, you're my son, Dale. As long as she can tell me I'm her son, Dale, we having a good day. And we might have some other challenges I talk about in a way there and stuff, but we look at the small things, it's a blessing. And David, I think he began to look back, and he began looking at the blessings God had bestowed upon him. And he said, the Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. How many times you've been going through something and you said, Lord, I just can't do this by myself. There's no way I can handle this anymore. And David, he's been there. He'd done that. So now he wanted to write a song to the Lord. And there's people that took this song and put it to music and words. And David is, for the Lord, for David, he was his rock, his deliverer, because he looked after him. The God of my rock, in him will I trust. He is my shield and the horn of my salvation, my high tower and my refuge, my Savior. Thou savest me from violence. How many in here, and I know some of you have, just out of curiosity, how many of you have ever been in a pretty bad wreck? Just raise your hand if you have. Look at there. A wreck to the point probably that could have cost you your life. But yet you're here today, and look, I mean, there was a lot. I didn't know we had that many bad drivers in the church. I'm just joking. Sometimes it's not your fault. But y'all can reflect right now, and y'all can really say the same thing, that he's your deliverer, because at that time everything could have changed. In him, he says, the God of my rock, in him will I trust. He's my shield. That's protector. He's the horn of my salvation, my high tower, my refuge, my Savior. Thou savest me from violence. He says, I will call on the Lord who is worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved from mine enemies. None of us as of this time has been put in a situation where we felt like our life is probably threatened by enemies coming from the outside to take our lives. But I'm telling you from what I'm seeing and how they're persecuting the church and what's coming, we might want to get the Bible out and be practicing our prayer lives for God's protection in that. There's countries just waiting for the opportunity to come. I think China's probably one of them. And they're just trying to figure it out. And like I say, if you've watched the news, it's hard to imagine that we have turned such a blind eye that we let them set up police stations across our United States of America. And these police stations, it says, are to police their own people. But they're doing that to persecute them. And how they do it, if you don't act right and do what we tell you over here, then we're going to cause your people in the homeland of China, they'll have to suffer because of your actions. So persecution has already taken place in Chicago, LA, some of these other places. There are people tonight that know they better be in their house by dark because they don't feel safe to be outside. We are seeing even Myrtle Beach, a place that we all grew up and enjoyed and loved going, and now it almost feels like it's a place that's not safe to be out at night because there's evil out and about. So David, he knew that God was the reason that he survived. When the waves of death compassed me, the floods of ungodly men made me afraid. The sorrows of hell compassed me about, and the snares of death prevented me. He says, when all this happened, in my distress, I called upon the Lord and cried to my God, and he did hear my voice out of the temple, and my cry did enter into his ears. There's no better feeling than to think and feel that you have a direct access line to God. When God healed me from my cancer, and I know I've talked about it so much, that really did something about my faith. When those men laid hands on me, there was 30-some men, and I was anointed, and I felt that presence in that room. I mean, it's a feeling that I've never forgot to this day. Happened 20-some years ago, just the most awesome feeling. And then to hear the doctor say you're cancer free, you will never have to worry about cancer anymore. And to know that God, even though we did some man treatment, but God ultimately told me, he says, I'm going to take care of this cancer. And then with my little grandbaby, and had the issue with the eye, and I know I've talked about it before with you, but I was just holding her, and I was thinking, God, you heal me. If you heal me, I know you can do this. But I said, God, I said, I promise you, the platform that you give me, that if you heal this child, because she was getting ready to have surgery next week. We didn't have a long time to wait. They'd come down from West Virginia. They were going to be there just for a few days, and it was going back next week to have the surgery. I said, God, if you'll do what I know you're capable of doing, says, I'll sing your praises to the mountaintop. I'll tell everybody about what you did. So after that night, I was holding that little baby, because I hadn't seen her much because they were in West Virginia, and just laid my hand over that baby's eye and said, God, if you would heal this child's eye. All she had was a stopped up tear duct. Still, she was going to have to be put to sleep and go in there and do a procedure to open up that tear duct. But the little baby's eye every morning was glued shut. Could not even open the eye. Courtney would have to take every morning a hot rag, soak that eye to get it to open up. And you could tell the eye was bothering the child. And so I said, God, I know you're able. And Father, I just pray that when this child wakes up in the morning, that was my prayer, that their eye would be perfect. And we'll give you all the power and glory. The next morning, I rocked her to sleep that night. She fell asleep, little Elizabeth. I laid her in the crib we had in there. The next morning, I could hear Courtney hollering, Chan, you got to come. You're not going to believe this. And we went there, and there was that little child laying in the crib with both eyes wide open. Hadn't been that way in a couple of months. And I just reflected about all this goodness and stuff. And through all that, God showed me his power and what it can do. And it helped me in my prayer life, because you know that if y'all ever called me and told me about a situation before I let you go, what do I always tell you? Let me pray for you. And I've not got every prayer that I've ever prayed for people here, but I believe that I'm going to get it. I pray it like I'm going to get it. I pray by faith. And then if it don't happen, I say, well, I'm sorry. My Bible says I'm supposed to pray without ceasing. So I just ramp it up, and I go a little harder. I say, all right, God, maybe you didn't hear me good enough this time. So let me say it to you again. But I just want you to be encouraged through some of my stories. And some of you have your own stories. You have your own testimonies. And I've seen what God's did in your life, and I've seen how God has grown you exponentially in your prayer life. And I see many of you now are reaching out and going that extra step. I remember hearing the time about Nikki coming, and he ran across a man. One of the first time you told me you just prayed with him open public. And I think many of you have increased your prayer life when you run across somebody. You're not ashamed and you're not afraid to lay hands on them, so let's pray right now. And great if you weren't here Wednesday night to hear Martha talk about the opportunity to a person working to share the gospel with that person and hear them accept the gospel over the phone to a total stranger and being faithful like that. So David, as he was reminiscing, he says, I have nobody else, Lord, but you to call to. Then the earth shook and trembled. The foundations of the heaven moved and shook because he was wroth. There went up a smoke out of his nostrils, and fire out of his mouth. Devoured coals were kindled by it. He bowed the heavens also, and come down, and the darkness was under his feet. And he rode upon a cherub and did fly, and he was seen upon the wings of the wind. And he made darkness, pavilions round about him, dark waters and thick clouds of the skies. Though the brightness before him were coals of fire kindled, and the Lord thundered from heaven, and the Most High uttered his voice. And you see God in that way when he's at work. You know, as I preached this morning about the wrath of God, I don't think God gets any pleasure at all when he has to discipline us. But I think we have to be disciplined at times. I think God has to get our attention. I think God has a purpose for each of us, and he's going to do everything in his power to do whatever he's got to get you to that purpose that he wants you to be there. And he sent out arrows and scattered them, lightning and discomfited them. In other words, when he went to battle, David was letting them know that he guided these arrows where they needed to go. He sent storms to just cause them to be discomfited, or in other words, not knowing which way to go. And the channels of the sea appeared. The foundations of the world were discovered at the rebuking of the Lord, at the blast of the breath of his nostrils. He sent from above. He took me. He drew me out of my many waters. This is just David writing to the Lord and thanking him. He delivered me from my strong enemy and from them that hated me, for they were too strong for me. There were times that David fought battles he should not have won, and David knew that. There were times that he escaped Saul that he should not have been able to escape Saul. But God had a plan and had his protection about him. They prevented me in the day of my calamity, but the Lord was my stay. There was times I was supposed to be somewhere, but I couldn't. Like when Absalom took his kingship, and they prevented him from being the king, but the Lord, he was his stay in power to keep him safe till he got back on the throne. He brought me forth also into a large place. He delivered me because he delighted in me. And I've got in that verse there circled, and I've got underlined in my Bible, delighted in me. Can you sit here tonight and feel with all confidence that the Lord delights in you? Now, I know he's probably not pleased with me all the time. And I had somebody mention to me this morning, you probably noticed I haven't been sending out quite as many all calls as I have. And it's a little more challenged, but I'm going to try to get back at you because I think it's important. I didn't realize how many times people really enjoy getting the all calls and the prayer times and lifting up there and stuff. And I'd get over to Mama's and I'd forget my papers at the house, and so sometimes I wouldn't do it. And then late in the afternoon, I just wouldn't do it there and stuff. But I want to be all the Lord wants me to be as your pastor, and I don't want to fall backwards. I want to fall forward. And even though my plate's a little bit full and I've got some things going on, I don't want it to take away from God's work. Like I told somebody, my mama don't know it yet, but my mother was talking the other day, and she's not missed a Mother's Day yet. So you might see her tied up in ropes and stuff, but she's coming Mother's Day, going to be sitting right there, whether she likes it or not. And so she hates Miss Diane, and Miss Glennie, I'm glad you got one too. She hates to come. She thinks she's coming with her little cart, she calls it, and she'd be in the way. I said, you're not in the way, Mother. You come on. So I'm praying that we can work that out and she can come. And I think it would do her good to start coming and getting out some. He said, the Lord rewarded me according to my righteousness. According to the cleanness of my hands hath he recompensed me. Now, was David's hands, in saying this about the cleanness of my hands, was David's hands always clean? David was a murderer. He absolutely, and we know he killed a lot of people in war, but God didn't hold that against him. But we know he killed an innocent man, somebody in his own army, just so he could cover up the adulterous affair of his wife. So we know his hands weren't clean, but God restored him. But he had to send Nathan, the prophet, to tell him that you did wrong. For I have kept the ways of the Lord and have not wickedly departed from my God. For all his judgments were before me, and as for his statutes, I did not depart from them. I was also upright before him, and have kept myself from mine iniquity. David did know what was right or wrong. And David, for the most part, when he did wrong, he did come to God, and he did ask God to forgive him. Therefore the Lord hath recompensed me according to my righteousness, according to my cleanness in his eyesight. With the merciful thou wilt show thyself merciful, and with the upright man thou wilt show thyself upright. With the pure thou wilt show thyself pure, and with the froward thou wilt show thyself unsavory. And the afflicted people thou wilt save, but thine eyes are upon the haughty, that they mayest bring them down. For thou art my lamp, O Lord, and the Lord will lighten my darkness. Let's pause right there for a second and think about light and darkness. And Aaron preached on that, us being the light of the world. And there's many places that we can be the light of the world. The young man that came to church this morning, Chuck and Andrea. I preached Chuck's mother and father funeral, and good people trying to find their way and not going to church a lot, but I've somehow God has been able to let me preach funerals, and just through a funeral sermon, had an impact on their life. So much so that his wife really wanted to come visit our church. Now, whether they'll be back, I don't know. He did tell me. I said, I hope you enjoy your day. And he said, we'll see you next Sunday, preacher. So that did my heart good. But what's the chances that I went and hadn't had any grits and eggs in a long time, but I had to go pick up something at Mullins this past week. So have a place in Mullins called Fred's, and I decided I'd stop by and get me something to eat. Well, guess who was in there that day? Chuck. So when I seen Chuck, I said, well, Chuck, he was about halfway through eating. I said, you mind if I join you? Because he was by himself. So I just sat down. I could have, if I want a cordial guy, I could have sat over there and said, well, I hate to bother him. He's about through eating, but I like to talk. So we sat down and we began talking. And that's when he began opening up to me about a lot of things about the Bible. He opened the door. I didn't open the door. And all I had to do was walk through that door. So he began talking about his wife, and he began talking about his boss who was at the funeral I just did, and how he said he wished his church was closer. He'd like to come to this church too, and just a lot of nice things and stuff. But I'm just happy that God lets my light shine in a way that can draw people that's in darkness to the light. Now, I'm not tooting my own horn. I'm trying to light your fire. You have that same light in you. But sometimes you don't use your light in the dark world like you should, because you become too much about yourself rather than about him. And when I sat down to talk with Chuck, I would have never opened the door and began talking about Bible and church and all that, but he did. And I told Chuck, and I think it made a lasting impression, I said, you know, Chuck, and Thomas, me and you had this same conversation. God saw this morning here before me and you even saw it. He knew you were going to be here. He knew I was going to come by. He knew there was some stuff you needed to talk about, and I hadn't told you everything we talked about, but he knew there was some stuff that you needed to talk about. He knew he was going to bring me here so you'd have somebody to talk to. I said, that's just the way our God works, Chuck. And so he said, you know, I ain't never thought about it like that, preacher. And many people out in the world don't. But I'm just saying that many of you have that same opportunity. And just think now, if all of us could let our light shine like that, and it made a difference, we would be talking a lot quicker than we might have to about where we're going to put all these people that's coming into this church. Now, I've got one hiding in this corner over here, Wesley. And Wesley's on fire for the Lord. And me and Wesley talk a right good bit about what he's doing. And he's the one who wants to pray for the job sites. And what he wants to pray for the job sites, because he started a new job and he wants to be that light at his job site. And he's trying all the time to bring somebody with him to a church. I was picking at Laney. She's not here tonight. But Laney brought her Uncle Kenny to church. And I says, Laney, would you be offended if I start calling you Andrew? Now, if you don't understand what I'm talking about, Andrew was the disciple that was always bringing somebody to Jesus. We don't know a whole lot about Andrew, but we know Andrew was always fighting. Come on here and I'll take you to Jesus. Well, Laney, I don't know if y'all noticed about her, she's bringing somebody of her family to church all the time because she's proud of what's going on here and she wants to bring and stuff there. So I don't want you to ever say that God can't use you. I never seen anybody as excited as Martha was. And I guess that was maybe the first person she's had the opportunity to lead to the Lord. In that avenue there, especially a total stranger. But man, she couldn't wait to get off the phone with her to call me and tell me. And I want that excitement with you. And once you ever catch that first fish, you'll want to go fishing all the time. For by thee I have run through a troop. By my God have I leaped over a wall. As for God, his way is perfect. Such great poetry the way David wrote all this. The word of the Lord is tried, and he is a buckler to all that trust in him. And that buckler is shield. For who is God save the Lord? And who is a rock save our God? God is my strength and power, and he maketh my way perfect. He maketh my feet like hinds' feet, and he setteth me upon my high places. He teaches my hands to war, so that a bow of steel is broken in mine arms. Thou hast also given me the shield of thy salvation, and thy gentleness hath made me great. Thou hast enlarged my steps under me, so that my feet did not slip. And that's very important to a warrior on the battlefield, that your feet don't slip, that you keep your feet. You know, we teach in football. I don't know if you ever notice this, and sometimes they don't listen too good, but we always teach a running back, it's better that you keep your feet, because as long as you keep your feet, you have power. But if you ever leave your feet, you lose that power. Now, sometimes they'll dive for that end zone, but if you're not diving for a certain area, you need to keep your feet underneath you, and that's important for a warrior too. I have pursued my enemies and destroyed them, and turn not again until I had consumed them. I have consumed them and wounded them, and they could not arise. Yea, they are fallen under my feet. David's talking about all the victories that God has given him. For thou hast girded me with strength to battle. Them that rose up against me hast thou subdued under me. Thou hast also given me the necks of mine enemies, that I might destroy them that hate me. You know, David, if you think about it, he never really lost a battle. Absalom, when Absalom was going to take him to save from having so much bloodshed in the city, David just left and let Absalom just come in because he didn't want to fight his son. But when Absalom and them come out to fight, they were no match for David's 600 men. They had a lot bigger army than David, but they were warriors. They looked, but there was none to save, even unto the Lord, but he answered them not. Then did I beat them as small as the dust of the earth. I did stamp them as the mire of the street, and did spread them abroad. Now, it might sound like David bragging a little bit, doesn't it? About all the things that he was doing and how he did. But yet he is bragging, but he's giving God knowledge. I couldn't do any of this, God, without you. Thou also hast delivered me from the strivings of my people. Thou hast kept me to be head of the heathen. When they tried to remove me as king, you allowed me to stay. A people which I knew not shall serve me. Strangers shall submit themselves unto me. As soon as they hear, they shall be obedient unto me. Strangers shall fade away, and they shall be afraid out of their close places. The Lord liveth, and blessed be my rock, and exalted be the God of the rock of my salvation. It is God that avengeth me, and that bringeth down the people under me, and that bringeth me forth from mine enemies. Thou also hast filled me up on a high above that rose up against me. Thou hast delivered me from the violent man. Therefore will I give thanks unto thee, O Lord, among the heathen, and I will sing praises unto thy name. He is the tower of salvation, for he is king, and showeth mercy to his anointed and to David, and to his seed forevermore. I read a little article somebody wrote that Charles Stanley's son, Andy, wrote. And he was saying, I think, about the day before his dad passed away, that Charles asked his son if he would pray for him. And then I think on the day that he was going to die, Charles told his son Andy, he says, Andy, today I'd like to pray for you. And sort of like Charles knew that he was going to pass away now. I'm pretty sure I read that. I hope I'm not in error in my telling you that there and stuff. But it makes a lot of sense that a father would want to pray for his son before he left the earth and pass those blessings. I'll never forget when my dad died that he didn't have to have any bad painkillers. Most time when people die, they have such strong painkillers, they're in a comatose state that you really can't talk with them, and they just die out. But my dad, he was able to talk right up to the end that he died. And it was amazing how right before he died, Daddy called me in there, and he was giving me my last orders. And he was telling me to be sure and take care of my mother, just like I know I would. But one thing that was important to my daddy that he asked me to do was, Daddy had a brother, and he'd never married. And Uncle Lester was a unique individual. Not everybody wanted to deal with Uncle Lester, and Daddy knew that. But Daddy loved his brother. And Daddy said, son, I know I'm asking a lot of you, but if you don't look after Lester, and he was in an assisted living home, he says, if you don't look after him, I don't know who will. He said, would you try to look after and take care of his needs? And Daddy needed that peace and assurance before he died that I would. And I said, yeah, Daddy, I'll make sure, and I did. I took care of Uncle Lester till the day he died. And they wanted that peace and assurance, and so they could go on. It is believed, if you'll turn back over in Psalms, and we'll close out tonight, that Psalms 18 is very close to Psalms 23. And many people believe that David, as he wrote Psalms 18, that very shortly after that, he wrote Psalms 23. And so many times, that's what I wanted to do, is read what I read to you there in 2 Samuel. We read it, but we really don't think about what he's writing and what he's saying. And I think Psalms 23 sometimes is the same way. So I want to close out tonight by us just read Psalms 23 and think about David in the same atmosphere that he was writing this in Psalms 18, and think about what he was writing in Psalms 23. He's an old man now. He's lived a lot, and he's seen a lot. And the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He's letting know that you're enough. I don't need anything else. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures, and he leadeth me beside the still waters. How many times did David, while he was being out in battle, had to lie down in green pastures and just wait? How many times were they looking for that brook where they could have fresh water? And I read something this past week I didn't know. They said if you're ever out in the open and you don't know where to drink from, they say drink from where the horses drink, because a horse will not drink bad water. I'd never read that. Did y'all ever read that? Did anybody know that besides me? I didn't know that stuff. I hope that's true too. I read a lot. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. I can think about restoring my soul mean a lot, but David really had to have his soul restored when Absalom died. He was a broken man because his son had died. He had to get over that because he wanted the kingship back, but he was broken. And yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. That's encouragement for us today. And so many times in our life, we can go through some tough times. There's people with cancer. Think about that. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, and my cup runneth over. And last but not least, surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. David, as he reflected, he had a lot to reflect on. Just like us, we have a lot to reflect on. We have a lot to really thank God about. I'm going to ask you, if you will, let's come and let's sing a song. I just feel led tonight that there might be somebody just need to come and maybe want to just thank God for something he's done in your life tonight. Home, if you're watching on Facebook tonight, maybe right there in your home tonight, maybe you just want to reflect in some way about what God's done for you, and just bow your head and say a little prayer tonight. What song are we going to sing? We can sing Just As I Am. What number is that? 435. 435.